Salutations and welcome, friends. My name is Matthew DeSantis, and this is the Win Play Show, a new weekly program as part of the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. Now, what is the Win Play Show? Well, it's a weekly show where we're going to be recapping some races that took place the previous week, previewing some races coming up the following week, and in addition to talking about big picture horse racing stories from across the industry and occasionally having on guests from across the industry. So it's a little bit different from some of our race previews and full card analyses, but I hope you enjoy it. Make sure to comment below with what your thoughts are on this very first episode. Share your ideas on some of the things we talk about. Love to hear feedback from all of you. Now, make sure to press that like and subscribe button here on the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos are dropping. Like I said, we got race previews, got a couple of those coming up this week, looking at some 2-year-old races out in California, the Desi Arnaz, the Bob Hope. We also have full card analysis for Saturday at Aqueduct. That's going to be coming up in the next day or two. And we're going to have a lot of content moving forward, getting you ready for the Gulfstream Park Championship meet, Turfway Park, the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks Trail in 2025, and so much more. All right. Well, like I said, welcome to the very first episode of the Win Play Show. We don't have a ton to recap in terms of what happened last weekend. A lot of the biggest races, obviously the best horses, all running in the Breeders' Cup, but there's still a lot of news coming out of the Breeders' Cup that I think has a really big impact on what we're going to see in this sport in 2025. And I know leading up to the Breeders' Cup, we talked a lot about retirements. Guilty as charged. I talked about them as well. If you watched any of my countdown to the Cups, we talked about, City of Troy being retired and National Treasure being retired and Domestic Product being retired, all these horses being retired. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to the Breeders' Cup. Every single Breeders' Cup winner, and there is a little asterisk here, which I'll get to in a second with NYRA, every single Breeders' Cup winner is coming back in 2025. That's really great news. And I think it really can speak to a healthier 2025 from not only a fan's perspective, but from a betting perspective. I can't tell you the number of times, you would look at the PPs of a race and you would go, okay, well, there's a even money, a 6-5, a 4-5, a 3-5. I don't think it's going to be hard to get around that horse. Maybe you try to beat him, maybe you try to single him. But there's a lot of times where there was just one or maybe two dominant horses in a division, but they didn't necessarily meet up very often. And so as a result, the betting in some of these races weren't even that great. The 2024 felt like it lacked some star power, I think, in a lot of ways. And it didn't feel like we got that star power, I'll be honest, until around the Travers. And I don't say that just because I'm up here in New York. I felt that way across the industry because, again, working for NYRA Bets, yes, I'm up here in New York, but I'm looking at races at Gulfstream Park, Oaklawn, Fairgrounds, Del Mar, Santa Anita, Churchill, Keeneland. I'm looking all over at races and writing about them every week here on NYRA Bets. But the bottom line is it really was that Travers, Thorpedo Anna, Fierceness, Sierra Leone, that felt like, hey, we got some superstars. And the really cool part about Breeders' Cup weekend is after the dust settled, you saw Anna do what she did in the distaff and absolutely dismantle the competition because there is no competition for her in that division at this point with the retirement of Idiomatic, with the retirement of Adair Manor. She kind of stands heads and shoulders above all the other fillies and mares in that division. And then you saw what happened in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Sierra Leone, Fierceness, finishing 1-2. Forever Young, another 3-year-old, finishing third. We're going to get to him in a minute. But it was a dominant performance by those three. And the amazing part is they're all coming back. That Kenny McPeak goes, we're bringing Anna back in 2025, and we're going to run her against the boys from time to time. And looks like pointing towards the Pegasus World Cup, which will, again, that's going to be a race we're going to talk a lot about in the coming minutes, but also in the coming weeks and months. Then you look at the Classic, and Mike Rapoli says Fierceness was the best horse in that race. Yeah, some people agree, some people disagree, but the bottom line is Fierceness comes out of running an absolutely huge effort. Whether you think he ran a better race than Sierra Leone is neither here nor there in some ways, but he ran a huge race. That can't be denied. And he's coming back now as a 4-year-old as well, according to Rapoli. And also he's bringing back Mindframe. That's an interesting development. Now listen, is Mindframe a step below these two horses? Of course he is. He's not as proven, but he ran second in the Belmont Stakes and he ran second in the Haskell. He's a nice horse. You know, he's two-time runner-up in a Grade 1. So he knows what he's got talent. And if you remember, he had a little bit of a setback. And I really thought to myself, I don't know if Mindframe's going to necessarily come back at 4. You know, it seemed like maybe there would be enough for Rapoli to get some sort of a sire deal out of Mindframe. Didn't know if he wanted to bring him back again, but he's bringing him back. That's good. That just provides more depth in the sport. Now, that's a good thing. Then you look at Coolmore saying Sierra Leone's coming back at 4. Oh, by the way, Carl Spackler on the turf is also coming back at 4. We love to see that. We love to see Carl Spackler. So really fun to see all of these great horses coming back, in addition to horses like Full Serrano in the Dirt Mile, in addition to Cherie's horse More Than Looks. And what a great moment that was right after she won her Breeders' Cup race in that Breeders' Cup Mile, which was what a great race that was in general. But so much to celebrate to see these horses coming back. And what's exciting is with Anna and Fierceness and Sierra Leone, you got yourself a rivalry. And you got yourself a rivalry in the premier division in the sport. And in recent years, that really hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened because, as I point out regularly on social media, it will be over 1,000 days since there was a Kentucky Derby winner who won a subsequent race. The last time a Kentucky Derby winner won a subsequent race was Mandaloun winning the 2022 Louisiana Stakes. That's the last time an official winner of the Kentucky Derby won a subsequent race. That's not great. That's not great for rivalries in the sport when the winner of arguably the most visible race in the sport, not saying the best race, not saying the premier race for 3-year-olds, because I don't believe that, but certainly the most visible race for 3-year-olds in the sport, and maybe the most visible race in the sport, doesn't win again. It really hurts the chance for rivalries to develop and for people to latch onto those rivalries. And that's why Sierra Leone, Fierceness, Anna, they all had prominent roles at Churchill Downs this past year. Anna obviously winning the Oaks. Sierra Leone finishing third in that thrilling finish in the Derby, and Fierceness being your betting line favorite in the Derby. Ran terribly in that race, but was your post-time favorite. So people are familiar with these horses. Then they come back, and the really cool part is you have Fierceness and Sierra Leone have faced each other now 4 times, and it's tied at 2 apiece. You know, Fierceness got the better in the Jim Dandy and the Travers. Sierra Leone got the better of him, finishing ahead of him, 3rd in the Kentucky Derby, and then winning the Breeders' Cup Classic. But this is what is going to help, I think, generate more interest in the sport. Also just provides greater betting opportunities. Because here's the thing. If you have a race, let's say the Pegasus World Cup, because it looks like all 3 of them are pointed towards that race. Anna, Fierceness, and Sierra Leone, all potentially pointed towards Gulfstream Park in that Pegasus World Cup. If that Pegasus World Cup was just Fierceness, just Sierra Leone, just Thorpedo Anna, if people be interested, obviously, from a betting standpoint, would it really be that exciting? I don't know. You put all 3 of them in that race, not only does that have star power, that makes it a great betting race. And that makes it that much more exciting, because if you think you can beat the 3 of them, hey, you're going to get a huge price in that case. So it's a lot of fun when you have these horses come back and run at 4 years old. So happy to see that. I appreciate the connections doing that, bringing all these horses back. They certainly don't have to do that, but I think it's going to be really beneficial for the sport. So great to see. And then there's obviously a good chance that either or both of Sierra Leone and Fierceness will go overseas and will run in the Saudi Cup and the Dubai World Cup. And there they will face off again with Forever Young. And I think that's going to be quite fascinating, because in a lot of ways, the 2 times they faced Forever Young before, in the Kentucky Derby and the Breeders' Cup the Breeders' Cup Classic, I should say, it was a home game for Fierceness and Sierra Leone. They didn't have to go through quarantine. They didn't have to ship halfway across the world. They just took a flight from New York to California. Now, that's not easy to do necessarily for a horse, but still, it's a lot easier than flying in from Japan to the West Coast, going through quarantine, etc. So it is going to be more of a neutral site game when those three face each other at Dubai, at the Saudi Cup. That's going to be a lot of fun. And I'll be honest, I probably will give a little bit of advantage to the Japanese in that particular space just because they have shown the propensity to run well in the Middle East, and Forever Young specifically has run well, winning both the Saudi Derby and the UAE Derby last year. So he's shown the ability to ship over and run well at those tracks. But that's going to be so much fun because Yoshido Yahagi and the connections for Forever Young have said, we're coming back to Del Mar next year for the 2025 Breeders' Cup Classic. So the idea that you can have rivalries in the premier division of the sport, that's really, like I said, very exciting to see. And then you got, listen, even a horse like Carl Spackler and More Than Looks, that's going to be an interesting rivalry to see. And they're going to knock heads a few times, I would imagine, up at Saratoga, leading up, throughout the summer and into next year as well. So going to be a lot of fun. And really, like I said, excited to see all 14 of the Breeders' Cup winners coming back to run in 2025. Now, the one asterisk is NYRA. Because if you remember, right after the Breeders' Cup, we have the Fasig-Tipton sale. That's where a lot of broodmare prospects will go and be sold. NYRA was one of those broodmare prospects, sold to interests in Australia, or that she'll be kind of in Australia after her racing career is over. But she sold for $4.3 million, by the way. Not bad. But paled in comparison to McCulloch. If you remember the Chad Brown mare, who sold for, sit down, $6 million. That's not a bad chunk of change. So you saw a lot of Ramatule, who scratched out of the mile, sold for $5.1 million. So you saw some really big price tags for those broodmare prospects. But what's interesting about NYRA is because she's going down to Australia, Australia's breeding season is inverted from what ours is in North America. So it's not breeding season down there right now, it's racing season. And so there's a good chance that NYRA is actually going to race down in Australia over the next, at some point during the next few months. And so if that happens, then all 14 will come back in 2025. Obviously, NYRA then will be pointed towards the breeding shed and look forward to her foals in the future years. But a lot of excitement there around the sales, around the Breeders' Cup and all of that. Now, we also have the Kentucky Derby Trail to start thinking about. You go, Matthew, it's November 13th. What are we talking about with this Kentucky Derby Trail? Well, we got important prep races coming up. We got the Remsen coming up next month. You go, Matthew, the Remsen, stop it. You're just a homer in New York. Maybe. But let me tell you something. The Remsen last year, you talk about a key race. Now, I don't know if I should use that word. Some people get upset when you say the word key race. Maybe I should say productive race. But I don't want to upset. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. But key race, productive race, whatever it was a hell of a race. And the winner was Dornoch, who goes on to win the Fountain of Youth, the Belmont Stakes, and the Haskell. The runner-up was Sierra Leone. He goes on to win the Risen Star, the Bluegrass, and the Breeders' Cup Classic while never missing the board in his career. Then you had Domestic Product in that race, goes on to win the H. Allen Jerkins, and finished third in the Dirt Mile. Then you had Copper Tax, who turned out to be a pretty nice horse. You had Drumroll Please, who went on to win the Jerome Stakes. You had a lot of nice horses in that race. So that was really exciting. Looking to this year's Remsen, looking to this year's, winter preps, not just necessarily the Remsen, couple of horses to think about. I think a horse like Studley Do-Right, who just won the Nashua, that's one I've always been a fan of. I like that horse a lot. I remember talking to my colleague Kaylee Shapiro in the paddock at Saratoga looking at that horse. And I remember looking at him and going, Kaylee, that's a big horse. I go, he really looks like he's going to want two turns. And this was right before the Hopeful, if I'm not mistaken. And she agreed. She was like, he's a nice looking horse. And Kaylee doesn't throw those words around very often. And so, that's one, wins the Nashua. I'd be interested in seeing where this horse goes. He's got a real shot, I think, to be maybe not a Kentucky Derby contender, but as a Maryland-bred horse, he's got a real shot to be a competitor in some very serious open state, graded stakes competition. I'm excited to see what Studley Do-Right does in the future. Chad Brown's got a nice horse. I know everybody talked about Chancellor McPatrick, and I get it. Chancellor will be back. It wasn't his day out in the juvenile and the Breeders' Cup for a lot of reasons. I don't think the track helped. The fractions certainly did not help. And the fact that that was just a Bob Baffert merry-go-round also didn't help. But I always thought Chad's other horse was maybe just as interesting, and that was Key Waden. Now, Key Waden won second time out, lost to a horse, Tip Top Thomas, in debut. If that name's familiar, that horse finished second in the Champagne to Chancellor McPatrick for Todd Pletcher. Key Waden finished third by about a nose to Tip Top Thomas and comes back to win very easily, very impressively next time out. The pedigree would say he's a sprinter, sired by Instagram, out of an unraced officer mare. So you would say, well, mile is probably what he's going to do. But, I don't know. He looks like he can handle more distance. Will he like two turns? We'll see. It'll be interesting to see what Chad does with this horse in terms of where he points him to next. Does he point him towards something like the Remsen? Does he take him down to Gulfstream Park maybe? Point him towards something like the Mucho Macho Man, which would be a one-turn mile. It'll be interesting to see. Another thing that's interesting coming out of that race with Tip Top Thomas, with Key Waden. Oh, by the way, the second place horse, Rookie Card, Danny Gargan's horse, came back to win 2 races later. And then the fourth place horse that day was Sovereignty. Who's Sovereignty? Sovereignty's Bill Mott's horse, who just won the Street Sense down at Churchill Downs right before the Breeders' Cup. Again, do I dare say the word key race? Maybe not. But it was certainly a race with a lot of really nice horses in it with, I think, very promising futures. Sovereignty is a very nice horse for Mott. I think that one's pretty serious. That's a name I would absolutely consider. Because I think when we talk about the Kentucky Derby Trail, we tend to fall into the trap of looking at the Breeders' Cup Juvenile field and going, well, which of these horses are going to go on to win the Kentucky Derby? And that just seems I don't want to say unlikely, but I don't necessarily view Citizen Bull or Gaming or Chancer, McPatrick, or East Avenue as favorites for the Kentucky Derby. I actually like some of these horses who maybe are a little bit later developing, who are now just starting to break their maidens, maybe just winning like a Sovereignty who just won the Street Sense. Those are the horses that I think are a little bit more interesting in my eyes, at least at this point. Like I said, I think Mott's horse Sovereignty has a real nice future ahead of him. And that was one that had a little bit of buzz up at Saratoga. I was talking to my colleague Darwin Vizcaya over the summer, and I remember he told me Junior Alvarado rides Sovereignty in the mornings and said he thought this might have been Mott's best 2-year-old that he had. So there was clearly some expectations there. Then Mott just debuted another really nice horse, Tux, this past weekend at Aqueduct. And you go, well, I don't know, a horse debuting at Aqueduct in November. I mean, how good can they be? Well, remember, last November, a certain horse named Sierra Leone debuted in a maiden race at Aqueduct as well. So nice horses debut at Aqueduct in November, believe it or not, which is all the more reason you should be following Aqueduct in November sometimes, because you get these gems. But that's a nice horse for LNJ Stables. I really like Tux quite a bit. That was my top pick in that race, but that was also just a horse that I just think has some nice pedigree to him. It is a little bit, there's some ability there for sure to go longer as well. And I think that's another one Mott, you got to take pretty seriously. Where does that one point next? Maybe does Mott step that one up to the Remsen right away? We'll see. But it's going to be interesting to start tracking that Remsen and kind of who's going to be pointing there. Remember, a lot of those New York trainers start also taking some of their best horses, admittedly, down to Gulfstream Park for the winter for that, like Mucho Macho Man, Holy Bull, Fountain of Youth, Florida Derby process. So it'll be interesting to see who goes where with all of this stuff. But going to be a lot of fun for sure. And then you have a horse like Tip Top Thomas for Todd Pletcher, who I mentioned before. That horse could easily point to the Remsen. Danny Gargan's Rookie Card could easily point to the Remsen. Honestly, that maiden race from back in Saratoga that was won by Tip Top Thomas, that could end up being a chunk of the field actually in the Remsen. That's a really promising maiden race, I think, in terms of looking at that. And we see that at Saratoga sometimes. If you remember, there was the maiden race, Dornick and Just Steel, or Seize the Gray, I should say. Well, not Just Steel, Seize the Gray, being in kind of a maiden race together. You see that. So Going to be a lot of fun. Another horse that's not 2 years old, but that I failed to mention that is coming back is Locked. Locked, who won the Breeders' Futurity last year, had a real long layoff, was supposed to run in the Fountain of Youth, scratched out of that race due to an injury. Pletcher's taken the real long road with this horse, comes back, wins recently and against Allowance Company. And, maybe Cigar Mile next? I don't know. Maybe. It'd be interesting to see where Locked goes, because that's another one, kind of like Mind Frame, a horse that maybe you forgot about a little bit, but could add some depth to that classic division. Going to be a lot of fun to see for sure. Well, listen, in terms of some other races coming up this week. Now, like I said, we got the Bob Hope, we got the Desi Arnaz. We'll talk about, the Notebook and all the good stuff we have going on Saturday at Aqueduct as well. But there's also a big race on Friday out at Del Mar, and that is the return of Tamara. Now, if you remember, Tamara is the foal out of Beholder, the legend, the $6 million 18-time winner, who was just so good and was just so fun to watch, and just absolutely loved her for all those years, winning the distaff and it just, multiple times, and being ridden by Gary Stevens for all those years, trained by Richard Mandela. Well, Tamara, if you remember, debuted last year at Del Mar on my birthday, actually, August 19th. Debuted on my birthday, won impressively, stepped up, really blew out the field in the Del Mar debutante. There was a lot of expectations around her. She went off as the 4-5 favorite in last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. I remember leading up to that race, there was a little bit of apprehension about how she was working out. She maybe didn't look quite as crisp as they had hoped. Ran in the race anyway. Turned out she had a little bit of a fractured splint in her left leg. She had time off. And then Mandela started bringing her back actually in the spring. It gave her some more time. She spiked the fever. There's been kind of ups and downs with her. And now she's fully back. She's fully healthy. She's firing off bullets out at Del Mar. She's running 6 furlong workouts. She looks like she's ready. She's going to make her return on Friday at Del Mar in a $100,000 optional claiming race, going 6 furlongs for the fillies, mares, 3-year-olds and up. It's race 7 on Friday at Del Mar. Post time, 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be honest, there ain't a lot else in this race. The morning line might not be out yet, but I have a hard time thinking that she's going to be anything but an odds-on favorite. And it's going to be hard for me to kind of make a legitimate case against her. Maybe you could make a case like a horse like Anywho maybe has a race or two good enough to come back to this. We'll see. But this looks to be just kind of a prep race for her in a lot of ways. She's going to be pointing to bigger and better things. She's another interesting one. Maybe she's a potential challenger to Thorpedo Anna if she ends up kind of, stretching out a little bit longer. And we'll have to kind of wait and see if Mandela wants to keep her in a sprint level or go stretching out and maybe going a little bit longer. So she is getting Lasix for the first time, but that's going to be a lot of fun to see her run on Friday and see her return. Always love those great pedigrees, like you said, with Beholder. And so, and Beholder's had a few different foals and a couple winners as well. One was won twice on the turf, I remember. But they all went to Mandela. She's really the first Beholder foal to show big time promise, I think, right away. And so I think that's why people got really excited about her. She also looks a lot like her. Too. She looks like her mom. Sired by Bolt Doro, if you're interested in kind of the top side pedigree there. So Tamara making her return, that's going to be a lot of fun. So listen, a lot of great content this week. Like I said, we got race previews, full card analyses. We're going to come back next week with another episode of the Win Play Show. These will normally be dropping on Mondays, so you definitely want to make sure to check those out. Like I said, a lot of times we're going to be recapping the big races from the weekend, looking ahead to the following week's races. We're in a little bit of a lull right now, so that's why I thought we'd talk a little post-Breeders' Cup action. We talk a little bit Kentucky Derby, prep trail, and then, talk a little bit about Tamara, the sales, a whole 9 yards, a little bit of a miscellaneous type of an episode. But hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments. Love to hear, let me know what guests you would like me to have on in the future. I got a few in mind that I'd love to have on, but love to hear your thoughts on who you would like to see me interview and talk to and learn a little bit more about the sport of horse racing. All right, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races and reminding you it's now post time.